I need to ask for a favor. What do you need? I need a place to stay for the night. The phone was silent for a couple of seconds. Azuku began to get nervous while waiting for a response. Is that all? Azuku sighed in relief and ran his fingers through his hair. She was his only help here. If she rejected his offer, well, he didn't know what he'd do. He told her his location and it only took 10 minutes for a limo to arrive. The window winded down to reveal Momo's mother. She smiled at him and gestured for him to come in. Look at you. It hasn't even been a day yet and you've already got your hands on a new set of clothes. I like it. They rode over to her estate where she gave him a room to sleep in. He could stay here as long as he needed. Izuku was just staring in awe at the place he was in. He'd never been in a house so big before. It made his apartment look so small in comparison. Miss Yaoyorozu waved her hand at Izuku to get his attention and directed him to an unoccupied room. She explained to him again how he could stay as long as he needed. Thank you so much, ma'am. I really appreciate this. It's no problem at all. It's the least I could do. He went to the guest room and laid on a bed there. He reflected on his whole experience today and just how crazy it was. He fell asleep and rested peacefully for the night. The next day, when he woke up, he stretched his body and walked around the manor until he encountered Miss Yaoyorozu. She was watching the TV intently. Izuku smelled some food and diverted his attention away from her. He turned his head over to where the food was and asked her about it. She waved her hand, saying that it was for him and that he needed to eat. He thanked her for her courtesy and quickly consumed all of the food. Well, most of it. He stopped when he heard a gasp. He turned to see his face on the TV. Well, a drawing of his face on TV. He was a wanted criminal. Azuku could feel his heart sink. He had plans on figuring out his life with the help of his mother, but now he had to be careful of even walking outside of this place. I should leave before you get in trouble for harboring a criminal, a vigilante. Absolutely not. Deku was grabbed by the woman and pulled back. She explained how he would need a disguise if he planned on even walking outside. She produced a handful of bandages and covered Izuku's face with them. He was surprised seeing her use her quirk. A materialization quirk? That seemed incredibly useful and powerful. He wondered if Momo also had that quirk or variation of it. He hoped she was okay. When Izuku's face was completely covered, the black-haired woman also grabbed the trench coat and fedora. Izuku looked at himself in the mirror and saw how, for the most part, his face was unnoticeable. The bandages were applied pretty well, and considering how some people had speech bubbles for heads, the most he would get is stares. He was already getting those from yesterday, so he figured there was nothing he could do about it. He would have to get used to it, whether he liked it or not. So, where are you going? She was trying to ask for his name. He kind of chuckled for a little bit. After all of these events that happened so suddenly last night, he never thought to give the mistress his name. It's Izuku. He rubbed the back of his head and also explained where he was heading. He wanted to visit his mother to figure things out, see how much things changed, how she was doing, that and more. Miss Yaoyorozu, when she heard the address, realized it was on her route. She was already planning to visit her daughter to see how she was doing. To find that Uzuku was going in the same direction seemed quite coincidental. She offered to drop him off there while she was on the way to the hospital. Thank you. It would be greatly appreciated. The two left and he was dropped off by an apartment building. She drove off and Izuku walked up the stairs. He looked around until he found a door with the number he was looking for. His heart was racing. He rose his hand up in a fist and began to knock on the door. He was incredibly nervous right now. He didn't know how his mother would react to seeing him in this state, if she even still lived here, that is. He didn't think this through. Why didn't he think about this up until now? Who's to even say she still lives here? Why would she? It had been 5 years. 5 years after the death of her one and only son. He never thought about the possibility of her perhaps moving to get away from the painful memories it may have brought to her. The more he thought about it, the dumber he realized his original thinking was. He began unconsciously muttering until the door opened. He looked up only to see no one there. He was confused. "Hello," a squeaky voice greeted. He looked down to see the little girl he rescued from last night. He was surprised to see her again. Before he could respond, he heard a familiar voice call out for the little girl. When he had a face to match the voice, it was as if his heart stopped beating for a second. It was his mother. She had a couple wrinkles and looked slimmer than the last time he saw her. Time really did change people. "Makumo Midoriya, what did I tell you about opening the door?" Inko asked. "Sorry, Mom," the little girl apologized. Inko looked up at Izuku, but she didn't necessarily recognize him, especially with all the differences. He was a lot taller now, and he was wearing a disguise. She looked at him in confusion. How may I help you, sir?" Inko questioned. Izuku was scared. He didn't know what to say. It wasn't like he could say that he was her son, the one that swan dived off the school roof over 5 years ago. It's pretty obvious that she wouldn't accept him with welcome arms like that, but he didn't know what else to say. He sighed. "Ma'am, your name is Inko Midoriya, correct?" She nodded while shooing her daughter away from the door. How many children do you have?" Inko was silent for a moment. She looked down before speaking again, with her fist clenched. "It depends. Are you asking about how many I have that are alive, or how many that I've had?" "Alive. 1. Why?" "Yes. Is it the little girl?" "Yes. I don't know why you're asking though. Did you ever have a son?" "By the name of Izuku." Inko stayed silent and began to close the door. Izuku grabbed the door though. "Let go," she said. Izuku refused. He refused though. He wouldn't let go. She had to know. "Mom, it's me, Izuku." "Liar!" she yelled. "Izuku's been dead for over 5 years now. I even saw his dead body at the school. You honestly think I'm going to believe some rando who claims to be my son? I'm not that gullible." He knew that she wouldn't believe him. He needed some form of evidence in order to prove to her that he was indeed alive. He let go and the door slammed shut. He pressed his back against the door and slid down. He held his knees and leaned his head against the door. He began speaking. "Do you remember how I always wanted to become a hero? The amount of times I would watch the clip of All Might rescuing 100 people from a burning building. He would even joke about me making up 80% of the views. Izuku laughed a dry laugh. He wasn't expecting an answer. "I wasn't 90, he asked. "It was 90%, she responded. "Yeah, I thought so. I even dressed up as All Might while you would hide underneath the sheets asking for me to rescue you. Those were some good times, wouldn't you say?" He heard her sniffling on the other side of the door. He could tell she was beginning to break down and cry. Yeah, they were. He could feel her begin to push the door open. He got up from his seated position and stood up straight. "How do I know you're not just someone with a mind reading quick or something? Do you have any quick dampeners, like in the form of a food, handcuffs, etc.?" Izuku questioned. Inko nodded and closed the door for a second. She came back out with a pill and some water. "Swallow this pill. It makes you unable to use your quirk for about 6 hours." Izuku did so with no hesitation at all. He began to list off his likes and dislikes as well to further drive home the point that he was alive. This time though, she could completely believe his words now that any use of a quirk was disabled. Not like he had any in the first place, or at least during his first life. "You really are Izuku, but what happened to you?" "I thought you were dead," she yelled. "I apparently was. I was dead for 5 years and I made a deal with the devil. Or at least, I think it was a devil, to become a hellspawn in exchange for another chance in the living realm." Inko blinked for a couple of seconds in disbelief. "I know it's hard to believe. I wouldn't believe myself either if I were put in anybody else's shoes, but you've got to believe me, Mom. Please." He even removed his fedora to reveal his green, curly hair and began to unwrap his bandages to reveal his face. Inko gasped in shock and horror at seeing how disfigured his face was. She looked deep into his eyes, though, and could tell that they were the eyes of her son. There was no faking those eyes, although they seemed to be a bit dulled out. Just a bit. He heard the TV being played in the background and the mention of a vigilante. He forgot. He began to rewrap the bandages around his face and began to get ready to leave. Inko grabbed his arm though. "No, you don't just get to leave. Not after 5 years of having me believe you were dead. Not after 5 years of turmoil." Izuku stomped and turned around to hug his mother. She was in tears and fell to her knees. Izuku picked her up and carried her into the apartment. They sat on the couch and began to chit-chat. Inko ended up explaining how much things had changed since his apparent death. His school was shut down for a little while at first. There was a full-on investigation in order to understand the reason behind why he ended his own life. Multiple teachers were fired from the school when they realized just how inefficient they were at caring for their students. Some of these teachers ended up having some lawsuits set against them when parents found out the mistreatment they got simply for their quirks not being all that strong. It eventually escalated to the school itself being sued and shut down permanently. Most of the kids either went to different schools or were homeschooled until the end of the year. Afterwards, they all simply moved on. Quite a few were scarred for life though, after seeing that dead body. Izuku found out to be interesting. He always thought his life was worthless. That was all he was ever told, but to hear that his death was that influential almost made him crack a smile. Almost. From the way his mother explained everything though, It didn't sound like any of the students were charged though. That was okay. But what about Bakugo? Did he really get away with all the abuse he gave him? The main reason for why he decided to end his life? Mom, whatever happened to Bakugo? Izuku asked. Has he become a hero? Did he ever go to UA like he always said he would? No, Bakugo isn't a hero or even learning to become one. He's in UA University currently and in their general course. He works part-time as a suicide hotline worker. No, Bakugo isn't a hero. No, Bakugo wasn't a hero, and Izuku was confused. UA University. He thought it was always UA High School. What's UA University, Mom? Oh, well, the public found that kids were becoming heroes too early. There were too many inexperienced professional heroes on the streets. They were causing too much destruction and focused too much on publicity stunts. It was okay for a while, but it became excessive. Too many were dying against real villains, so all hero high schools were forced to become hero universities. That way they could recruit more possible heroes and have them gain more training at an older age, 18. That age is recognized as a moment where you start to make wiser decisions and comprehend at a far higher level. 22 would be the new age for you to become an official hero. It's still new, so I can't tell you how successful it has been so far. Izuku nodded and asked his last question. So, when did Mukumo come into the picture? Surrogate mother. Your father and I were going to tell you that you were going to be having a little sibling, but when we were going to announce it, they heard knocking at the door. Izuku's eyes widened in fear. When Inko asked who was at the door, the man answered saying they were the police. Inko looked back at Izuku and Izuku looked at her. He jumped out the window and fled the apartment. He couldn't afford for his mother to get in trouble with the law for harboring a vigilante. He was on the run now and he needed to clear his head. All this new information seeping into him was kind of hard to take in. He wasn't paying attention to where he was running though and bumped into someone. Oh, sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going. Izuku apologized. He noticed the look in the person's eyes, so they were cold and two different colors. He didn't know who the person was, but he had no time to talk. He needed to get as far away from his mother as possible for right now until he could clear his name. He stopped moving suddenly though and felt a cold sensation. He looked down to see his legs encased in ice. He was confused at first until he looked around to see who did it. It was a person he bumped into. He wasn't interested in having to go through another confrontation, but it appeared as if he had no choice. If they wouldn't let him explain himself, that is. That is the end of the video, guys. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It's your boy King Titan X signing out.